The Arizona sun hung low, casting a bronze glow over the community center's cracked parking lot, where dust clung to the soles of boots and sneakers alike. Inside, the air was thick with the hum of restless voices, a crowd packed shoulder to shoulder in a room that smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. Folding chairs creaked under the weight of anticipation, and the walls, adorned with faded posters of local heroes, seemed to lean in, listening. This wasn't just another town hall. It was a crucible, a gathering of hearts pounding with the same furious question. What the hell do we do now? At the front, a man named Mike stood, his flannel shirt slightly untucked, his hands gripping the edges of a cheap podium as if it were the last anchor in a storm. His voice, rough from shouting at protests and hoarse from sleepless nights, carried the weight of 1,000 unheard cries. "Go ahead," he said, the words trembling with defiance. "I've been to the Tesla protests, to DC for the hands-off march. I've screamed till my throat burned, stood in the cold till my bones ached. And for what?" His eyes, shadowed but fierce, scanned the room, locking onto faces that mirrored his own. Pissed off, tired, done. "We're all here, talking, yelling, but it's like shouting into a void. Nothing changes, nothing moves." The crowd stirred, a low rumble of agreement rippling through them. A woman in the back nodded, her arms crossed tight, as if holding herself together. A young man with a faded cap clenched his fists, his jaw set. Mike's words weren't just his, they were theirs, carved from the raw ache of a nation watching its promises slip through calloused fingers. He spoke of Tesla's picket lines, where workers and dreamers demanded fairness from a billionaire's empire, and of DC, in where the air had crackled with chants against policies that felt like betrayal. But now, standing here, Mike's voice cracked with the confession that haunted them all. It doesn't feel like enough. He wasn't just angry. He was wounded, carrying the kind of hurt that comes from believing in a country that sometimes forgets its own. His words hung heavy, a challenge to the room, to the system, to the very idea of justice. Outside, the world churned on. Politicians spun their webs, corporations tightened their grip, and the news cycle churned out despair like a factory. But here, in this sweaty, overcrowded hall, Mike was drawing a line in the sand. His frustration wasn't surrender. It was a spark, a flare shot into the dark, daring someone, anyone, to answer. The room held its breath, waiting. Eyes flicked to the front, where a senator sat, his face unreadable, but his posture alert, like a man who'd heard this storm brewing before. Mike's voice echoed one last time, softer now, almost a plea. "What's the point if it doesn't matter?" And in that moment, the fight wasn't just against policy or power. It was against the creeping fear that their voices, their America, might already be lost. The silence in the community center was a living thing, heavy and taut, as Mike's question lingered like smoke after a fire. Every eye turned to the senator, a figure carved from the grit of Arizona's deserts and the polish of Washington's halls. He rose slowly, his suit slightly rumpled, his gaze steady, but kind, like a man who'd seen storms and learned to navigate them. The crowd leaned in, hungry for something. Hope, direction, a reason to keep fighting. Outside, the world spun on its axis of power and betrayal. But here, in this cramped room, the senator held the floor, and with it, the fragile pulse of a movement. "Mike," he began, his voice low but resonant, cutting through the tension like a blade through canvas. "You're not shouting into a void. Those protests, Tesla, DC, every step you took, those are tremors shaking the ground under the president's feet." He paused, letting the words sink in, his eyes sweeping the room, catching the flicker of doubt in a young woman's face, the clenched jaw of an older man. "When you show up, When you raise hell, it's not just noise. It's a signal to every Republican in Congress, every suit in the White House, that they're on the wrong damn path. The crowd stirred, a murmur of agreement rippling through them. But the senator wasn't done. He leaned forward, hands braced on the table, his voice gaining heat. Tariffs that choke our wallets, foreign policy that sells out our allies, cuts to Medicaid and Medicare, threats to Social Security. These aren't just policies. They're attacks on who we are. And when you march, when you chant, you're telling them the American people see through the lies. His words were a rallying cry, not shouted, but spoken with the quiet ferocity of a man who'd fought too many battles to waste breath on bluster. He straightened, his gaze distant for a moment, as if seeing the chessboard of power in his mind. There's a force out there, folks. Call it political gravity. I know a thing or two about gravity, he said, a wry smile tugging at his lips, drawing a soft chuckle from the crowd. And let me tell you, it's real. The president's got his base, sure, a loyalty that's fierce, almost unholy. But no one escapes gravity forever. His approval's already wobbling. High 40s, slipping fast. When it hits the low 40s, then the 30s. He shook his head, his voice dropping to a near whisper. That's when the rats start jumping ship. Senators, congressmen, they'll start whispering in private, then speaking out loud. They're on the sidelines now, spineless, but they'll move when the ground shakes hard enough. The room was alive now, the air electric with possibility. A woman in a faded denim jacket nodded fiercely, her eyes bright with renewed fire. A man with a veteran's cap tilted his head, as if weighing the senator's words against a lifetime of promises broken. The senator's voice was a lifeline, pulling them back from the edge of despair, reminding them that their anger wasn't futile. It was a weapon. You're not just protesting, he said, pointing at Mike, then sweeping his hand across the crowd. You're shifting the tide. Every sign you hold, every mile you march, it's a crack in their armor. They feel it, even if they won't admit it. And when they start to fear for their seats, that's when we win. The senator's words hung in the air, a challenge and a promise, binding the room together in a shared defiance. Mike stood still, his hands no longer gripping the podium, but resting at his sides, his face a mix of exhaustion and tentative hope. The senator's eyes met his, a silent vow. Keep fighting. We're not done. Beyond the walls, the Arizona night stretched vast and unyielding, but inside, the spark Mike had lit was catching, fueled by a man who knew the cost of silence and the power of a voice raised against the odds. The senator's words still echoed in the community center, a spark of defiance kindling in the eyes of the crowd when he shifted his stance, his voice taking on a new weight, like a preacher about to unveil a hard truth. The room, alive with the pulse of renewed purpose, grew quiet again, sensing the pivot. Mike had stepped back, his flannel shirt a faint blur in the crowd, but the senator held every gaze, his hands gesturing now, carving the air as if to shape the future itself. Outside, the Arizona stars burned cold, indifferent to the fire inside, where a battle for the soul of a nation was being waged, one heart at a time. Let me tell you something about Arizona, the senator said, his voice steady but urgent, grounding the room in the red dirt and sprawling skies of their home. We don't have a patchwork of healthcare systems here, one for the poor, one for the old, one for the lucky few with private plans. It's one system, one beating heart, and at its core is Medicaid. He paused, letting the word land, heavy with meaning. Medicaid isn't just a program. It's the foundation that keeps hospitals like TMC, where my Gabby was born, where our grandkid took their first breath, or Banner, standing tall. It's the lifeline that keeps our communities whole. The crowd leaned in, some nodding, others frowning, as if bracing for a blow. A woman in a nurse's scrub top, her hair pulled back tight, sat rigid, her eyes locked on the senator. A man with work-worn hands clutched a folded flyer, his knuckles whitening. The senator's voice grew sharper, slicing through the haze of political jargon that too often dulled such truths. If they cut Medicaid, if they kick 400,000 people off that roll, it's not just those folks who suffer. It's all of us. Hospitals lose millions, but the patients don't vanish. They keep coming. TMC, Banner, they'll still treat the sick, the broken, the dying. But without payment, they'll have to slash staff, shut down beds, cut corners. And when that happens, the whole system, your system, mine, ours, starts to crumble, too. His words painted a vivid, terrifying picture. Emergency rooms overflowing, nurses stretched to breaking, rural clinics shuttered, families left to pray over fevers in the dark. The senator's eyes burned with a quiet fury, not at the crowd, but at the faceless architects of such a plan. "This isn't about politics," he said, his voice dropping low, almost confessional. "It's about survival. You might have the best insurance in the world, but if the hospital down the road can't afford to keep its lights on, what good is it? If your neighbor can't get care, how long before the ripple hits you? We're in this together, whether they want us to believe it or not." A murmur swept the room, not of anger now, but of realization. A dawning clarity that this fight wasn't abstract. It was personal, visceral, woven into the fabric of their lives. The nurse in the scrub top wiped her eyes, her face a mix of exhaustion and resolve. The man with the flyer looked up, his shoulders squaring as if ready to carry a new weight. The senator pressed on, his voice rising now, a call to arms. "They'll tell you these cuts are about saving money, balancing budgets. Don't buy it. It's about power, about dividing us, making us think we're separate. But we're not. Oppose these cuts, not just for the folks on Medicaid, but for your kids, your parents, yourself. Because when the foundation cracks, the whole house falls." The air in the room felt heavier now, charged with a shared stake in the fight. The senator stood tall, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, lingering on faces that reflected the same stubborn spirit that had built this state from dust and dreams. He wasn't just speaking to policy, he was speaking to survival, to the fierce, unyielding heart of a people who'd faced deserts and droughts and still stood. The battle wasn't just in Washington. It was here, in the stories of TMC's maternity ward, in Banner's emergency lights cutting through the night, in the quiet courage of those who refused to let their neighbors fall. And as the senator's words settled, the crowd felt it. This was their line in the sand, their chance to hold the heart of their system together, no matter the cost. The senator's voice still hung in the air, a clarion call to protect the fragile heart of Arizona's healthcare, when a sudden stir broke the spell. The crowd's focus shattered as a woman surged to her feet, her silhouette sharp against the dim glow of the community center's fluorescent lights. Her scarf slipped from her shoulders, her eyes blazing with a fury that seemed to pull the oxygen from the room. She was no bystander. Her presence was a storm, raw and unapologetic, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "Enough!" she cried, the word a jagged edge of pain and defiance, trembling with the weight of unspoken grievances. The Arizona night pressed against the windows, vast and silent, but inside, the air crackled with the collision of passion and order. The senator froze mid-breath, his hands still raised from his last gesture, his face flickering with surprise, but also recognition. This wasn't the first time a voice had risen from the crowd to challenge the script. Chairs scraped as heads turned, some craning to see, others shrinking back, sensing the tide turning unpredictable. The woman's hands shook, not from fear, but from a fire that had burned too long in silence. "You talk about systems, about gravity," she said, her voice rising, unsteady but fierce. But what about us? What about the ones who can't wait for your politics to catch up? Her words weren't aimed at the senator alone. They were a reckoning, a demand, hurled at the room, at the nation, at a world that too often looked away. The crowd was a kaleidoscope of reactions. A young man in a hoodie nodded fiercely, his eyes alight with her audacity. An older woman clutched her purse, lips tight with unease. The senator stepped forward, his voice calm but firm, trying to bridge the gap. "We hear you," he said, raising a hand, not to silence, but to soothe. "We understand your anger, and it's real. But let's keep this together." His tone was steady, a lighthouse in the swelling storm, but the woman wasn't ready to yield. She took a step forward, her boots scuffing the worn linoleum, her voice breaking with the weight of her truth. "No, you don't get it. It's not just about healthcare. It's about everything. The lies, the greed, the way they grind us down and expect us to stay quiet." The room teetered on the edge of chaos. A volunteer in a blue vest moved toward her, hesitant, his face torn between duty and empathy. The senator tried again, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "Ma'am, we're with you, but you've got to sit down, or we'll have to ask you to leave." The words were gentle, but unyielding, a boundary drawn with regret. The woman's eyes darted across the crowd, searching for allies, for someone to rise with her. But the weight of the moment held them fast. Her shoulders sagged, not in defeat, but in the exhaustion of carrying a fight too big for one voice. "Fine," she spat, her voice a low growl, "but I'm not invisible." She turned, scarf trailing like a banner, and strode toward the exit, the volunteer trailing awkwardly behind. The door swung shut with a thud that echoed like a gavel, leaving the room in a stunned hush. The senator stood motionless, his face a mask of resolve tinged with sorrow, knowing this wasn't just a disruption. It was a mirror, reflecting the raw, unfiltered pain of a people pushed to their limits. The crowd shifted, some whispering, others staring at the empty space where she'd stood, her absence as loud as her presence had been. Outside, the woman's footsteps faded into the desert night, but her spark lingered, a challenge to the room. "Will you carry this fire, or let it die?" The senator cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping over the faces before him, each one a piece of the fractured, fierce soul of America, waiting for the next move in a fight that was far from over. The echo of the door's thud still reverberated in the community center, a lingering pulse of the woman's defiance that seemed to vibrate in the bones of everyone present. The Arizona air inside felt charged, as if the walls themselves held their breath, waiting for the senator to reclaim the fractured moment. He stood at the front, his silhouette softened by the dim lights, his face a map of resolve and reflection, etched with the weight of what had just unfolded. The crowd, restless yet riveted, watched him, their eyes a mosaic of hope, doubt, and unspoken questions. The woman's exit had left a void, but also a fire, a challenge to prove that her outburst, her pain, wasn't in vain. The senator exhaled, a slow release that seemed to ground him. And when he spoke, his voice was different, less a politician's cadence, more a storyteller's reverence, as if reaching back through time to pull forward a truth. "I applaud her," he said, his words deliberate, slicing through the tension. "That woman, her fire, it's what this country was built on." A murmur rippled through the room, surprise mingling with curiosity. He stepped closer to the edge of the platform, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, locking eyes with a veteran in a worn cap, then a young woman clutching a notebook. "There are veterans here," he said, nodding toward the man, "who fought for her right to stand up, to speak out, to shake this room. That's not disruption. That's America." The crowd stirred, a low hum of agreement, but the senator wasn't chasing applause. His voice grew richer, weaving a tapestry of history that felt alive, urgent. "Think about it," he said, his hands gesturing as if conjuring ghosts from the past. The abolitionists standing in dusty squares, shouting against chains, when half the country called them traitors. Did they stop? The suffragists marching through jeers and jails demanding a voice. Did they back down? The civil rights marchers facing dogs and hoses, singing freedom through bloodied lips. Did they quit? His questions landed like drumbeats, each one pulling the crowd deeper into the lineage of struggle. A man in the back straightened, his eyes glistening. A teenager in a hoodie leaned forward, as if hearing his own future in the words. The senator's voice softened, but its intensity didn't waver. "I hear their echoes in her voice, in yours." "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired," Fannie Lou Hamer said, and she kept fighting. And when they tried to tear down the Affordable Care Act, to strip health care from 20 million souls, it wasn't politicians who saved it. It was you. He pointed into the crowd, not at one person, but at all of them, his finger a bridge between past and present. Republicans, Democrats, Independents. You showed up, town hall after town hall, protest after protest. When it started, the ACA was underwater, despised. But by the time John McCain cast that vote, you'd made it untouchable, because you made your voices undeniable. The room was electric now, not with anger, but with a dawning pride, a realization that their footsteps echoed alongside giants. The veteran adjusted his cap, a faint smile breaking through his stoic mask. The young woman's pen hovered over her notebook, as if she couldn't write fast enough to capture the moment. The senator pressed on, his voice a steady flame. "Don't let them fool you into thinking this. Showing up, speaking out, doesn't matter. Every Tesla protest, every march in Jersey, every time you refuse to be silent, you're bending the arc of history. You're telling the powerful they can't hide, can't ignore us. Not in Arizona, not in DC, not anywhere." He paused, his eyes scanning the faces before him, each one a spark in a constellation of resistance. The woman's absence still lingered, but her fire had found a home in the room, fanned by the senator's words into something larger, a shared resolve, a reminder that their fight was woven into the very fabric of the nation's story. The air hummed with possibility, with the weight of history and the promise of what could come if they refused to yield. Outside, the desert night stretched endless, but here, the senator had lit a beacon, calling them to carry the torch of those who'd fought before, to prove that no stand against injustice was ever in vain. The senator's words had woven a spell in the community center, binding the crowd to a lineage of defiance that pulsed through America's veins. The room thrummed with a quiet intensity, each person tethered to the past and the promise of their own power, their faces alight with the glow of shared purpose. The Arizona night pressed close outside, its vast silence a stark contrast to the warmth within, where the senator stood, his presence a bridge between history's echoes and the urgent now. He paused, his gaze softening, as if reaching for a memory buried deep, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a story too personal, too profound, to be anything but truth. "Let me take you back," he said, his tone shifting, intimate, like a man confiding a secret to a trusted friend. It's 1965, and a white lawyer's sitting on his couch in New Jersey, the TV flickering with images that burn into his soul. The crowd leaned in, the rustle of clothing and creak of chairs fading as they followed him across decades. He's watching marchers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, men, women, kids beaten bloody for daring to demand their rights. Bloody Sunday, they called it, and it shakes him to his core. He's got a law firm, a life, reasons to stay put. But that night, something breaks open inside him. The senator's hands moved slowly, painting the scene. A modest living room, the hum of a black and white set, a man wrestling with his conscience. He thinks about going to Alabama, joining the fight, but he can't. Not yet. Bills, clients, responsibilities, they chain him to that couch. But then he decides something that changes everything. I can't do it all, but I'll be damned if I do nothing. A murmur of recognition rippled through the crowd, a nod to their own moments of resolve. The senator's eyes gleamed, catching the light as he leaned forward. So he starts small. Pro bono work with the Fair Housing Council of Northern New Jersey. He dives into the fight against housing discrimination, a quieter battle, but no less fierce. The story unfolded like a river, steady and unstoppable. This lawyer, the senator continued, he gets clever. He sends black families to view homes in the wealthy suburbs, places where doors slam shut the second skin color comes into play. When they're told the house is sold, he sends white couples right behind them. And guess what? The house is still for sale. Over and over, he exposes the lie, drags it into the light. Newspapers pick it up, people start talking, and the pressure builds. A woman in the crowd, her hair streaked with gray, gripped her neighbor's arm, her face a mix of pride and pain, as if she'd lived that same rejection. The senator's voice grew taut, charged with the drama of one case that stood out. One family, a black couple, determined, proud, gets denied a home in a suburb that's never seen integration. The lawyer's team pulls their trick. The white couple confirms the house is available. They place a bid for the black family, set the closing date. But when the day comes, the white couple doesn't show. Instead, it's the black father, standing tall, and the lawyer, unflinching at his side. The room was still, every breath held, as the senator's words painted the scene. A tense real estate office, the agent's face twisting with rage when he realizes he's been caught. The agent loses it, the senator said, his voice dropping low. He punches the lawyer, sicks a Doberman on the father. It's chaos, violence, barking, fear. But that father fights off the dog, stands his ground, and they walk away, bloodied but unbroken. A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a swell of admiration. The senator pressed on, his voice rising with the triumph of what followed. They wrote letters, got the media involved. The homeowners, shamed by the truth, sold the house to that black family. And they moved in, the first black family in that suburb, cracking open a wall of exclusion that had stood for generations. He paused, letting the victory land. Then his tone shifted, softer, almost reverent. And here's the part that'll stop your heart. 43 years later, the baby in that family, the one carried through that fight, stands before you, one of the few black senators ever elected to this nation's highest halls. The room erupted, not in cheers, but in a collective intake of breath, a wave of awe and pride that surged like a tide. The senator stood tall, his own story now a mirror for the crowd's struggles, his life proof that one act could ripple across decades. The veteran in the cap wiped his eyes, unashamed. The teenager in the hoodie stared, as if seeing his own potential reflected back. The senator's gaze swept over them, his voice steady but thick with emotion. That lawyer didn't march on Selma, didn't topple empires, but he got up, did what he could, and changed the course of a family, a town, a nation. His fight is yours. Every step you take, every word you speak, it's building something bigger than you know. The air in the center hummed with a new energy. The crowd no longer just listeners, but bearers of a legacy, each one linked to that lawyer's courage, to the senator's rise, to the unbroken chain of those who dared to act. The Arizona night outside seemed less daunting now, its darkness no match for the light kindled within, a light born from one man's choice, one family's stand, and a senator's vow to keep the fight alive. The community center was alive with the weight of the senator's revelation, his story of a lawyer's quiet courage and a family's triumph, still pulsing through the crowd like a heartbeat. Faces glowed with a mix of wonder and resolve, each person seeing themselves in that New Jersey suburb of 1965, in the Black Father's defiance, in the senator's improbable rise. The Arizona air inside felt charged, not with the desert's dry heat, but with a current of possibility, as if the walls had absorbed the stories of struggle and spat back a challenge. What will you do now? The senator stood at the heart of it, his silhouette a beacon in the dim light, his eyes fierce yet warm, holding the room in a moment that felt eternal. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper, intimate but unyielding, as if speaking directly to each soul before him. "Don't you ever think it's for nothing," he said, the words cutting through the hush like a vow. "Not one step you take, not one word you shout, not one sign you raise in the face of power. It's never in vain." The crowd was still, hanging on his every syllable, their earlier doubts now distant shadows. A woman in a faded denim jacket clutched her hands tight, her knuckles white, as if anchoring herself to his promise. A young man with a backpack at his feet nodded slowly, his eyes burning with a fire kindled by the senator's tale. The senator's gaze swept the room, lingering on faces that carried the weight of their own battles. Factory workers, teachers, parents, dreamers, all bound by a shared hunger for justice. "They want you to feel small," he continued, his voice rising now, a tide of conviction. "The suits in Washington, the CEOs in their towers, the ones who write laws to keep you down. They want you to believe your voice doesn't matter, that their power is too big, too heavy. But let me tell you something. They're wrong." He slammed a fist on the table, not for show, but from a truth that demanded release, the sound jolting the crowd like a thunderclap. That lawyer in 65 sitting on his couch watching a nation bleed, he could have stayed there, let the world spin on without him. But he got up, he acted, and because he did, I'm here, and you're here, and we're still fighting. The room seemed to breathe as one, each person drawn into the senator's orbit, their hearts sinking to the rhythm of his call. He pointed into the crowd, not at anyone, but at everyone, his gesture a summons. "You're not just protesting policies, you're rewriting history. Every time you show up, whether it's a Tesla picket line or a march in the rain, you're telling the powerful they can't outlast us. You're telling your kids, your neighbors, that this country belongs to us too." His voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from the depth of his belief, and it hit the crowd like a spark on dry grass. A nurse in the back wiped her eyes, her face a map of exhaustion and hope. A veteran adjusted his cap, his chin lifting with quiet pride. The senator stepped closer to the edge of the platform, as if to close the distance between himself and the people, his words now a crescendo, fierce and proud. "No one standing up for what's right ever wastes their breath. Not in 1965, not today, not tomorrow. You're building something, something they can't tear down, no matter how hard they try. So keep showing up, keep speaking out, because every single one of you is a piece of this nation's soul, and together, we're unstoppable." His voice rang out, not just filling the room, but seeming to ripple beyond it, through the Arizona night, across deserts and cities, a defiance that dared power to meet it head-on. The crowd was no longer a collection of strangers, but a single force, bound by the senator's words and the legacy they carried. Mike, standing near the back, his flannel shirt now a quiet emblem of his earlier rage, met the senator's eyes, a faint nod passing between them, a pact renewed. The woman who'd stormed out was gone, but her fire lived here, in the faces turned upward, in the hands clasped tight, in the unspoken vow to keep going. The senator stood tall, his breath steady, his story and theirs now one, a tapestry of resistance woven from small acts and unyielding hearts, ready to face whatever the future demanded.